Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to day 4000 of quarantine, or so it feels. Um, but today I'll be giving my human factor spotlight on video game UI, and more importantly, how video game UI can truly make or break a game or a person's experience with a game. So first, let's start off with just kind of a basic outline of what is a user interface. So UI stands for user interface, and mainly a user interface acts as a point of interaction between the users and a computer. And frequently, it's coming in the form of a graphical user interface. On the right, you can see two that people are probably most familiar with. So we have the old Windows 8 UI, which was a big deal when it came out, that it was the new tile format. And then, of course, like an iPhone or an Android phone has a very well-known and well-used interface. And the point of a GUI or any UI really is to display information to users from the program that they might not have otherwise had access to. So obviously, video games are one of the ways that people really interact with computers the most frequently. Um, at least right now, when we're all in quarantine, we're all playing video games. We have some free time, hopefully, staying inside. Um, but UIs play a huge role in how information is displayed to users. Because obviously, if you have no user interface, um, there's things the player's not gonna know at all about the game. It has to be displayed through some other means, like a UI. And it's a very important kind of heuristic that UI designers need to follow um, to display what is needed for the user without impeding the user. So it's kind of, you know, uh, essentially the more minimalistic, the better when it comes to UIs, because it's very easy to overload the user with information. We only have so much visual processing ability. We can only look at so many things in such a quick succession of time. So it's very important to kind of be choosy about what's being displayed. So on the right, there's two probably very familiar user interfaces. Consequently, they are both from Wii games. That wasn't, I didn't mean to do that, but, and you can tell just right away looking at them that there's not a whole lot of, confusing graphics, not a whole lot of confusing, um, pop-ups or anything. It's just very streamlined, very out of the way, but the user can also look and see pretty much everything that they need to know to perform whatever actions they're doing in game. So it's really kind of it's following that heuristic of being minimalistic while still displaying what it needs to. So those are some examples of good user interfaces. But the ones that I have next are kind of some examples to highlight the opposite side. Ones that don't necessarily follow that rule, that might not be so streamlined, that might not be so um, uncomplicated. So these are just some bad examples per se. So you can see this is the Titanfall user interface, and right off the bat, it should kind of strike you that everything is kind of blending together. It's very kind of hard to distinguish colors, contrast from each other. It's very busy to look at. There's not a lot of free space to just kind of let your eyes rest. And it means that it's really difficult for users to kind of quickly and easily distinguish information that's important to look at. And also, there's a lot of things popping out into the field of vision in the center of the screen where the user is going to need to be looking for action that's happening within the game. And so it's kind of interfering with the actual main purpose of having a user interface, is to display information without impeding the user. And then this is from Final Fantasy Dissidia, um, and it's just extremely busy. All of the numbers popping up in the middle, like right around here, is just really obnoxious. It's hard to even see the characters sometimes. Plus, you have a lot of information down at the bottom of the screen that's kind of barging into the field of view of what you would normally be looking at. So this kind of leads me to the study that I found, which was a study examining how UI placement would affect users' gameplay. Um, and they were also interested in examining how placing a UI into the anticipation zone could affect performance. And the anticipation zone is really the field of the game, the field of the screen where the user is going to be looking for critical information to kind of determine what they're going to do next. So in the case of this game, it was just a simple top to bottom scroller. So the blocks would move like that towards the bottom of the screen, and the user had this ball here that they needed to guide through the field of blocks. And so obviously the user would need to be looking towards the top of the screen in order to kind of see where the blocks were coming down towards them and kind of judge the path that they needed to take. So the researchers developed these 4 scenarios with having the UI at the top of the screen, at the bottom of the screen, just above the level where the ball would move back and forth. And then they called it far bottom, but actually the UI was outside of the window that the game was being shown in. And so it wasn't even really covering up any aspect of the game. And there were 4 trials, one per UI. There were 2 separate groups of 25 participants, all aged between 22 and 26, with varying degrees of prior experience with video games. So after performing the test, having the participants go through and kind of try their hand at each of the scenarios, the researchers tallied both statistics about performance, so how many errors the users made, how many times they hit the blocks, as well as they used an eye tracking software to determine how frequently people would glance around the screen, where they were looking, and where their gaze kind of fell as an average. And so when it boiled down to the final results, they found that people that used the far bottom screen or the far bottom test where it was outside of the UI actually performed the best. They had the fewest errors, and this was kind of attributed to 2 things. The first was that users could use their peripheral or ambient recognition in order to view the score. And so it seems a little controversial that you would place something important outside of the main focal point where the user's looking, kind of in the periphery, because we always think of peripheral vision being very kind of fuzzy, not very detailed, very motion oriented. But in fact, they discovered that when people were allowed to kind of glance out of the corner of their eye, to see the score, which wasn't something that directly affected their gameplay. It wasn't something that if they didn't look at the score, it wasn't going to hurt them. And they found that that was actually the best place to put it was outside of the standard field of vision, outside of the gameplay area. And then also, they found that this was the best option because given that people could use their peripheral vision the most, instead of kind of glancing away from the ball, it allowed them to keep their gaze focused on the ball in the center of the screen more time of the game than any of the other setups. So there's some definite implications of this study and the sort of human factors that were studied. So one thing is that UI designers need to be conscious of a lot more than just the appearance of their interface. So a lot of times, especially in video games, the people are trying to make, not just a useful interface, but something that looks good. And they're trying to maybe integrate their art style of the game into it, or they're trying to integrate, like unique features or graphics into it. But sometimes that can actually be a detriment because it makes it more busy, or it makes it clunkier for the user, or it has more invading on the screen where the actual gameplay is happening. And so users or designers just need to be more conscious of things, besides just appearance. And then also, going back to the heuristic that I was describing earlier, the UI needs to just be as minimal as it can while still supplying the information. So you don't want to have a lot of unnecessary information because it's so easy to overload, our vision, our processing, if we're trying to move our view from this counter to this piece of text to this gauge on screen. It's going to be really difficult to, have a real clear idea of what we're supposed to be looking at if we're trying to glance between all of those things. And then finally, there's applications beyond just video games of this study, obviously. Um, Industries such as automotive and military have, for many years, been using heads-up displays or UIs that are projected onto or directly into our field of view for a real-world action, such as driving or piloting a plane or anything like that. And the human factors that were studied in this experiment come definitely right into play because they don't. If you're going to be having a UI projected onto somebody's windshield, perhaps when they're driving, you want to make sure that they can get the information they need from it, but they should not be impeded by it. And as much the same way as the game, you want to have it kind of in the peripheral vision so that if you need to focus on an action that's happening ahead, like a car changing lanes or something, it's very easy to focus on what you need to instead of having the UI get in the way. And this is an example of just kind of a basic one that's been sort of proposed. I think this was a Garmin design to project directly onto the windscreen of a car. Just having real basic information like lane departure warning, GPS, speed, and stuff like that. But you can see that it's very low out of where you would be looking if you were glancing ahead at a car. So it wouldn't really invade upon, basic driving tasks. So that's that pretty much about user interfaces and video games. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you.